Hey, family. Today we're going to talk with Ed Wiley III. Ed Wiley III is an incredible human being who enjoyed a career as a journalist before moving into restaurateur. Now, he has a restaurant that some of you may have seen posted on my socials. It's called Prime Smokehouse, and it's along the river, Tar River, in North Carolina. It's in a section of the community where people thought nobody would travel to have a good meal experience, and yet they're lined up and reservations are dear. But beyond that, he just has such a rich family history, a beautiful wife who's a partner in his life, and a commitment to keeping people healthy and happy through great food. Enjoy our conversation. Ed Wiley III. General, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. And as a North Carolinian myself, you, your lovely wife, Yalem, and I share an adult affection for a state and that particular region I think you're sitting in right now of Tarboro, Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Everybody knows I was born there. How did you guys land there?
Well, it was sort of a winding route to get here. I'm originally from Philadelphia, as you know, and I left to go to California. I went to Cal State, so I was in California, and I came back east to take a job. At the time, I was working as a journalist, as you know, and I moved to D.C., and it was so crazy in D.C. after being there for about 15 years that I said, I got to get out of this traffic.
What year was that? What year was
I left D.C. in 2008.
It could be any year and be crazy, though, right?
Traffic, the congestion. And I told my wife, I said, let's sell the house and move. And I didn't want to move too far from my family, which was still living in the Philadelphia area at the time. So we just hopped sort of one state down. We're living in Virginia, D.C. area. And we ended up in North Carolina. And it was been a good move.
Well, take us back a little bit to your roots in Philadelphia. What was it like growing up there, the son of renowned
people? We had a great childhood. It had some challenges because we lived right in the inner city of West Philadelphia initially. And then my father heard about these beautiful houses out in the suburbs, So we moved out in the suburbs of Levittown, Pennsylvania, but we didn't know at the time that Levittown wasn't really ready for us. It was very segregated. In fact, we integrated that neighborhood. And so we had some real struggles growing up, some real battles in fighting the segregation. But eventually, we acclimated and they acclimated to us. And so it was a lot different than we expected.
Well, Levittown has its own history and it's richly represented if anybody wants to Google it. But you being a part of it had to be an amazing impact to your psyche and to your family's personal culture.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It was nothing like we expected, and so you get there and you're fighting those battles every single day. But my parents were the type that, they said that because you're Black in this neighborhood and you're fighting these battles, when you go to school every day, we want you in the books. We want you reading. We want you to do better than anybody expects you to do. Everybody wore sneakers and jeans. My parents said, nope, you're going to wear crease pants. We're going to put a nice sweater on you. All through my elementary school, we wore a necktie or a bow tie. We had to shine our shoes to go to school. Our shoes, everything had to be just
what everybody else did on Sunday for church.
We knew all the eyeballs were on us, so it was one of those things that we really had to always think about how we presented ourselves and how we behaved. And it was always on our mind.
Truly, there may be few of us who can't remember that our community or our parents or our teacher, someone telling us whenever we were stepping forward into a new circumstance where we may not see many or any other Blacks, that we're representing our race. And I remember actually feeling that to be a burden, not an opportunity in many instances growing up when my dad would say that to me. Did you feel some of that?
That's very perceptive, and one of the benefits that I had is that I was one of 7. There was 7 of us. So it's like a bunch of, I wasn't alone in that sense, but you always.
Right. 11 of us.
Oh, wow. 11, but so you understand. I mean, at least we had each other. And But
Hmm.
aside from each other, there was nobody else. You know, my
Yeah, but once you got to the classroom, there was one
one per
per
class.
class.
That's right. And you know, and
Yeah, yeah.
oftentimes, you know, and I reflect back often on the times that you heard the N word flying, or you heard things, someone accused you of doing something you didn't do, or where they set you in a classroom. And there was a lot of things that you didn't think of in the moment, but when you reflect back, you realize just how race played a part in all of that. You know.
That's interesting because you did attend integrated school in your early years, and I attended segregated schools. So much of what I know as integration occurred for me in the workplace instead of the schoolroom, but you had it from a very early age. Now, you've shared with my family and me how your dad cooked of necessity while touring the Chitlin Circuit by himself. And I'm going to ask you about that. But right now, I would love you to share how your family's catering business ignited your passion for the
You
culinary.
know, my father, we know he's a musician and he played gigs at
Yes.
night. And, you know, with seven kids. So he ended up taking a job as a machine mechanic. And he would go to work and he'd have these beautiful lunches that he'd make. He'd get in the cafeteria and open his lunch, and people, man, what do you got today? And, you know, he'd have barbecue chicken. He'd have, you know, all these different things that he'd fix. And my father said, I can fix it for you too. You know, if you'd like, I can bring that for you. And before long, he had all these long list of orders that he was taking. And he'd go and he'd take this hot
Mhm.
food. And before long, one day he comes home from work and he's made a decision that he's going to buy a lunch truck. And he bought a lunch truck and turned it into a business. That ended up being a family business. He walked away from the machine mechanic job, had this lunch truck, and then he did something which was just out of the ordinary at that time. He took $3,000, and this is in the 70s. This is in the late 70s. $3,000 was like a whole lot more money than it is now. And he bought a route.
Mhm.
He bought a route that had seven
Mm.
stops on it. I remember my mother saying, $3,000. You paid $3,000 for this route. Had these stops. He would go be an hour on one stop. He'd be 15 minutes on another. You know, so on and so forth. And that business became very lucrative. And that became the family business. And everybody in the family, all the kids, we'd be making sandwiches. We'd come home from school, we'd start making sandwiches, wrapping them. He had these beautiful salads. He'd bake all these lovely cakes. And so when he lifted the sides of his truck up, he'd have this rainbow of beautiful sandwiches, pastries. He had hot food, nice fresh coffee, all this sort of thing. So and everybody every day there was a line at every stop waiting for him to get there. So that decision to spend that $3,000 ended up being really a beautiful decision. And
I bet it smelled pretty good around
And
there
it did.
too.
It did. You know, one of the things that I often think about is just the impact that that lunch truck had on the way I thought about things in the restaurant. My father had this thing where everything always had to be beautiful and fresh, always had to be colorful. He liked when you lift it up, everything had to be. You had oranges and apples and, you know, everything big and pretty and nice. And that's the same concept I use in the restaurant now. I never thought, never dreamed that when I went away to college, after being in the catering business as a kid, that I would ever recircle back to that thing of cooking and present food to people. Never dreamed that I would do it again. And here I am.
And truly, General, I can hardly wait to talk about the restaurant, but I gotta have you take. See, your journey is so impressive. I mean, you transitioned from journalism to becoming a restaurateur. So, talk a little bit about the journalism before we get to the Prime
You know,
House.
one of the things that my mother, I talked about when we were in school in early age and how she always, you know, pushed us to excel. One of the things we had to do every day when we got home from school was we had to sit down and read. But she wanted us to read aloud so she could hear the cadence of it and the rhythm of it and that sort of thing. So
Mhm.
we're sitting and we're reading, and I fell in love with reading. And as a result of falling in love with reading, I fell in love with writing. I remember I went away to school, and one of my teachers said to me, she said, "You know, you have the makings of a great writer." And that was embedded in my
Mhm.
brain. And I'll never forget Dr. Mullencott. And I always wanted to be a writer. My mother could write beautifully. She would write op-eds for the newspaper. You know, she challenged different things, especially on race. And those, it would be in a newspaper. And I always felt very proud of that. And one day I wanted to do that. And I went away and I became, a journalist. I went to Cal State, Fresno State, and became a journalist. And that's what ignited it.
And how do you think your years in journalism influenced your approach to storytelling through your culinary
You know,
creations?
it's one thing you learn when you talk about storytelling, that's important because in journalism, people get caught up with the word journalist and journal, but it's really about conveying, really about getting people to hear your story and what your experiences are. And whether you're writing or you're talking it through, it's just another medium for getting the expression of that story out. And being able to really tell those stories is really it's it's interesting, it's fun, and it's when you see people be able to connect with it, you know that you're making some headway.
Well, people definitely connect with it. Each time I've been in the Prime
Mhm.
Smokehouse, whether it's connecting with the location and the specifics of that and the rich history of the facility you're in, or dynamically and always connecting with the food itself and how it tells the story of their lives. Even my own family, we sit there and maybe it's talking about the candied yams and how yams played into our lives, but you've taken it to another level, or you can eat the yams and not be afraid that you're going to get a headache from sugar. I mean, it's just your food not only tells your story, it helps everybody who comes in there and sits at a table relate to their own story through it. And I think that's
I had to go back a little bit on something. I told you we moved out into the suburbs from West Philadelphia, moved to the suburbs. And when we get to Levittown, Pennsylvania at the time, backed up to our house were these woods. And in the woods, everything grew in the woods. There was these gnarly looking apples, these hard pears that are hard as marble. There were these
right.
grapes with skin so tough on it that you can't eat them like you eat table grapes. They're just, got a
Mhm.
slimy middle in them and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And you
Yeah.
have all of these wild things growing, blueberries by the bucket loads. And my father walks through these woods and he could turn anything in those woods into something delicious. And we were the only people who ate that stuff out of the woods. Nobody else touched it. We go back there, we get baskets of
Mm,
stuff,
mm.
and we come in and he convert all of that stuff. And the thing about these, my father could turn something to look like it was the cover of a Better Homes and Garden magazine. It
Mm,
was
mm,
beautiful. It
mm.
was delicious. He fixed things like duck, and he put the oranges on it and glaze it, and it would be garnished with this. So a lot of the things that you see that I'm making, these foods tell a story. They tell a story. They
Mhm,
take me
mhm.
back. When you see all of these pies and bread pudding, you always had bread. Every house had some leftover bread, right?
Right,
He
right.
turned that in with cream and eggs and butter and so forth, and turned to a nice bread pudding, put some raisins in it. He cooked those grapes and make grape jam out. I could do all of those things, and all of those things are in the restaurant pretty much now because of what that was all about. Pulling that stuff out of the woods.
I can hardly wait to read the book. I know you and Yalem have to do a book. But look, let me ask you one more question about your journalistic career. Are there any stories you covered as a journalist that you're particularly proud of as you look back on it?
Yeah, there's several things. I spent different phases of my life. There were different journalistic paths that I had, and one was I worked as soon as I graduated from college, Cal State. I worked with McClatchy News. I was with the Fresno Beat for some years, and one of the stories that I was very proud of that I worked was a series of actually 21 stories that I did on a series of group homes known as Awani Hills Boys Home. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we did a story that broke the way that these boys were being sexually abused, and they were being physically and sexually abused, and taken advantage of in so many different ways, monetarily speaking, and so forth. How they robbed the state of money to take and support these group homes, and those stories closed those series of group homes down, and there was some incarcerations that followed. I was always proud of that because I felt like these kids were really in a bad way. that's a series of stories that I was very proud of. Later on, I moved. At one point, I was the editor of the managing editor of Black Issues in Higher Education magazine, and that was a higher education publication. I enjoyed working with that publication because it exposed me to a lot of things that I didn't know about the African American experience as far as scholars and business people like yourself, for example. That how many different experts there were in the African American community in every aspect, from whether you're talking about nuclear physicists or you're talking about horticulturalists. There was just so many things that we were able to take and let the world know that usually you don't hear about, business leaders and so forth. So that was an important part of it too. There's so many different things in journalism that I was able to take and experience and write about that just, I did it for so many years, almost 30 years. So it was a lot going on.
Certainly, truth, research, clarity are important parts of journalism, and sometimes we we moan that we don't believe we get that all the
It's
time.
true.
But no, not but and I have a particular affection and gratitude for Black journalists during the time I was growing up in Tarboro, North Carolina, because I learned about Black people doing things that were great, good,
That's exactly right.
decent,
Mhm.
smart, life changing through journals like Ebony, Jet. There was one called Sepia that I don't think many people remember now. And they weren't sold in Tarboro at that
Mhm.
time in stores. They were brought in along the railroads by men called Georges. You're familiar with the
Oh yeah,
Georges?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. These porters, everybody's name was George. I guess nobody was important enough to have their own name be called. In any event, they would bring those magazines, and that's how I would learn about Black people doing things. So, the work that you did in your journalistic career, you have to be
You
so
know,
proud of it. And I know there are a lot of people grateful to you
thank you.
for
You know,
it.
one of the stints in journals I had was as a managing editor at BET News. And I
Hmm.
was always proud of the fact that we were covering the things that mainstream media wasn't covering at that time. It really
Hmm.
needed exposure, and I would always try to push in the context, put things into context, because you could hear a regular story, and whether and just having the opportunity a lot of times to interview people like Barack Obama, for example,
Hmm.
or one of the Republican presidents like George W. Bush, and being able to get
Right,
them to
right.
explain things that they sort of glossed over, to go in a further depth about,
Hmm.
the African American experience and education. I covered education for quite a bit. And I thought it was really interesting and important and necessary for us to ask the questions that white media weren't going to ask. And
Yeah, and George W. Bush was open to all journalists
yeah, he
and
was,
really did. Yeah, he really did, and he had a deep and good perception of what was happening.
especially in the black higher
When
education experience in particular, too.
Yes, 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 yes. And I don't think a lot of people know that about
Mhm.
him, especially if they're not reading what Black journalists
Sure.
write, because Black journalists do acclaim him for that. Did you ever know my dear departed friend, Pat Tobin?
I know,
She was,
I know who she, but I didn't really know her.
yeah, she was active in the Black
Yeah,
journalist organizations. You know
yeah.
of her, but she was one who shared with me something that later Dick Gregory told me.
I
I
used to talk
went
to
to
Dick
my
regularly,
suite.
but go ahead. Yeah, I used to talk to Dick
I went to
on
my
regular.
suite at the Staples Center. Listen, listen, General. I went to my suite at the
Uh-huh.
Staples Center one evening, and this was early in the days when it was the Staples Center.
Mhm.
It's now Crypto, and I saw this man sitting there, and it was Dick Gregory, and they had directed him to the wrong suite,
Mhm.
which in the end ended up being the right one for me. And one of the things during a great conversation I got a chance to have with him that he shared with me has stuck with me. He said, and this was back in the day when we used to get newspapers,
Mhm. Sure.
right? He said whenever he would travel, he would make it a point to pick up all the local newspapers and look for the national topics. And he'd read them all. And he said somewhere in the midst of that, he could aggregate his own truth. And his point was that people are going to tell it from a perspective, but he needed to get down to the data of it. And many journalists at that time, if you recall, were moving more into perspective journalism than data
You know,
journalism. And so he was doing the work of a
he,
journalist. And
he really
that
was.
stuck with
And
me.
you could, at any time, Dick Gregory would have 50 news clips on him. He
Yeah.
connected those dots. He had
Yeah.
all of these news clips he would carry, and he could always take you back to date, time, publication, who wrote it. I remember when I was at BET News at the time, and Katrina was in the news every day, and the main the news outlets were breaking this story all over the place. And you may remember this, that when a lot of black folks were staying in the Superdome at the time, and they were saying that
Yeah.
that there's these thugs that are going through there and there's raping these people, and they're beating people and raping people and robbing people. And I remember Dick Gregory called me. He said, "Whatever you do, don't bite on that BS." He said it's not true. And I'm listening to him. He
Mm.
says, "Think about this, Ed. How many African Americans do you know, men, strong black men, would allow that to happen? These kids just coming through, raping people, beating people, robbing people, and that community is going to watch that happen and not say anything." He said it's not true. I believed him. The more he spoke, the more I realized that this is making a lot of sense.
Right,
What did the
right,
stories
right.
end up saying about that? There's not a single case, and everybody's running this story at the time. There wasn't a single case of that happening that was documented. And the outlets had to come back on that story now and say that that wasn't happening. And I remember thanking him, saying, it's funny. I said, the more you speak, the more I listen. Because sometimes he would say stuff that would seem like it was from outer space. And a good friend of mine, a writer, James Michael Brody, who wrote Created Equal, The Lives of Black Innovators, and he said, "Ed, the longer I live, the more powerful Dick Gregory sounds to me. And I always thought that.
Mhm.
We talked regularly.
Mhm.
He was. I spent some time. I worked for a woman that I admire. I love her. Her name is Marion Wright Edelman, and she's the head of the
Mm.
Children's Defense Fund. I was her managing editor for some time. And one of the things that was really important and significant, I like to mention her whenever I get an opportunity, because this African American woman was, you talk, in the forefront of innovation and ideas and thoughts about community and children and how we save that next generation and so forth. But she always had things that were inspiring, that were motivating, and she surrounded herself with journalists, and she surrounded herself with black leaders, as you know, and people from Oprah Winfrey and to Hillary and so forth and so on. And she always had these people around her. And she purchased the Haley farm, the Alex Haley farm, some years
Mhm.
ago, and after he passed. And she headquartered the Black Community Crusade for Children at that farm in Tennessee. And it was just beautiful. She bring these black leaders together and these celebrities. I don't know if you've ever been out there to the Alex Haley farm with Marion, but that was one of the things that she really prided herself with, is really making sure that we were paying attention to what was going on in our community from these leaders from Cornell and on and on and on. So I like that.
A
A
shero.
powerful one.
Yeah. Well, you've got heroes in your life too. Your father's legacy as a saxophonist is globally respected and also colored by his work along the Chitlin Circuit. Talk about your dad a little bit for us. I mean, you've got a restaurant that's dedicated and decorated with him and your mother's life. Talk about it. Share it,
I'm thank you
please.
for saying that, because I there's not a moment goes by when I don't really think about him and his impact on my life. Not just the fact that he taught me how to cook, but he was just a nice man. He was someone who cared about his life was dedicated to raising his 7 children. And I remember telling him, as I was putting some of his thoughts together in the book that I was working on at the time, and I said, I will never never be able to thank you enough for the sacrifice you made when you said, I need to step away from music and figure out how to do more to raise this family, no more traveling, and let me get focused on this. And until we went away to college, my father took 20 years off, to raise his family. And I remember what my father said to me, which I found very powerful. He said, I don't feel like it was a sacrifice at all. I feel like my family saved my life. I thought that's beautiful. You really think
Wow.
about that, how powerful that was. And, talk about my mother. You saw the beautiful mural on the wall. You see my father with a saxophone,
Yes.
and you see my mother sort of standing over his shoulder. And I told you the story of how, 1951, and my father's band just gets on tour in the South. He gets up to Philadelphia area. And to make a long story short, a local singer, Mae Robinson at the time, he invited her up to sit in with his band. She sits in with the band, and he says, "You're good. You want to join the band?" She says, "I'd love to join the band." She says, but my mom's not going to let me join no band. My father said, "Well, let's go to your mom's house." That sounds just like him. Let's go to your mom's house because she lived nearby. We get to
Mhm.
the woman who was my grandmother, get to the house and said, "Mrs. Robinson, we want May to join the band. She's good. We're going to be traveling all over the place, but we're going to take care of her." And Mrs. Robinson said at the time, "I trust you, Ed. May, you can join the band."
Mhm.
And I'm thankful for that because I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now if that didn't happen.
And so many people don't have that image, in particular, of musicians and especially of Black people and Black musicians, that there was that courtesy and that thought and that etiquette that accompanied these artists as they were building their careers. And I'm not trying to paint a brush that everybody was,
Sure.
innocent and, and,
That's right.
and spotless in behavior, but there was a common courtesy and respect, and it traveled the circuit with them from the homes and the communities they had to stay
That's
in,
right.
dine
That's right.
in, and visit to build their careers, didn't it?
As my father's traversing these Midwest and South and all that, he's like, he had dignity. We're not going to the
Hmm.
back doors and eat in these restaurants and say, "Go around the back, boy." No, we're not going to that place. I'll cook
Hmm.
for y'all. We're not going to those places.
Hmm.
And it's just in going back and excavating some of these stories from many of the people in his band back in the day, who had got older now, and I'm going back because I had this refueled interest, and they're talking about my father. They said he was like our father. And they're close in age. He was like our father on the road. He looked after us. He was, he was always that guy who was about not just survival, but how we enjoy this thing. Because it was tough times. He talks so many times about how unscrupulous managers and club owners and record promoters and record folks. There was so much corruption, so much exploitation that they had to figure out how to survive and how to make something out of nothing. So I thought it was, those stories I always found a lot.
And we're not just talking about Black musicians here. I mean, the night that I came to the restaurant when you had, I was lucky enough to be there during the summer series, right? And you had the vibraphonist, and
Oh, Joe
he was
Locke, that's
he
right.
was
You
like
had to, yeah, and he. Mhm.
he he was tearful
Yeah.
about his respect and his relationship to your father. I think, didn't he tell us that he didn't trust that he, because we had weather going
Mhm.
on, right? And he didn't trust that he would make it, so he actually, they drove to
He
Rocky
threw his
Mount,
plane
North
ticket away, got in
Carolina.
his car, and drove. If he was in New York, he drove to the Prime Smokehouse from New York. He didn't trust the flight. He didn't want to make that gig not happen. So he drove down,
and
and his band.
And then when he got there, he said he walked into the restaurant and he saw the mural, and it just brought it all back to him. And he shared throughout his set his relationship to your father. We talked about your father in terms of his culinary
Mhm.
skills, but talk about him as a musician and an artist. Do a little history here,
My
please.
father was 17 years old in Houston, Texas. He grew up in the poor wards of Houston, Texas, third ward, fourth ward, fifth ward. And there was these two guys who came from New York, two Jewish guys who came through New York and were recording up all of the blues musicians in Texas, as many as they could get. And my father had a little local thing happening as a kid. and he's playing the dances and he's playing the things. So people pointed and said, you know, you need to go check out Ed Wiley Jr. They called him Junior at the time. They go check out Junior.
Hmm.
And so he's in his aunt's living room when these two guys come down, Bob and Morty Shad, you might know from Sitting In With Records, Mercury Records, they, you know, did the whole
Right.
record thing. And they go in his aunt's living room. They taped up all of the windows and the doors so they could soundproof this room. And they had an old reel to reel. And they said, just start playing. And all these blues musicians would come through, piano players and so forth. But my father was the one who's backing all of these cats. And one of the guys who sits down at the piano, his name is Teddy Reynolds. And Teddy Reynolds sits there and they start playing. He starts singing "Cry, Cry, Baby." I don't want the money, baby. You know, old blues thing.
Yes.
So they recorded all of these records. They're just recording side after side after side. So anyway, fast forward a little bit. My father's parents wanted him to go to Baltimore and study at the conservatory at Baltimore because they said he's got a little bit of talent. So he gets to Baltimore and he goes, they ask, where do musicians play in along Pennsylvania Avenue? There's all of these jazz musicians and jazz clubs and blues clubs and everybody's playing. And my father would go into this place every night. And when he gets in there, the musicians would disperse. They start going all the corners. He'd go the next night, say, and when he pulls the guy aside, he says, a piano player, Clyde Patterson, he says, what the heck is going on in here? He says, every time I show up, everybody goes all these different ways. And he says, that's because they know you're the narc. I thought, what are you talking about? They thought he was a narcotics agent because he shows up in Baltimore. Nobody knows him. And at the time, they have these musicians who are looking out to find out who who can spy on him and report it back to the you know.
Right.
I said, I'm not no narc. They said, what's your name? He said, my name's Ed Wiley. And Patterson says, Ed Wiley. Ed, cry, cry, baby Wiley. My father said, what are you talking about? He said, come here, man. He takes him over to a jukebox. And he says, is that you? And there's a record in the jukebox, Cry, Cry, Baby, Ed Wiley, featuring
Right.
Teddy Reynolds. My father didn't realize his record was a hit until that minute. And then another guy comes over. His name is Piney Brown, the blues.
No social media back
Social media.
then.
And they said,
and no transparent accounting.
there's none. They said, my God, man, you know, you're a star. Man, let's go on the road. And that started my father on the road right there. Just turned 18 years old, Cry, Cry, Baby, which my father couldn't listen to, by the way. Let me point that out. He couldn't listen to any of those old records he did when he was, doing this blues circuit thing. Musicians evolve, and you know how that thing is. But that thing was a hit. It was on Billboard 16 straight weeks, number 3. And they toured all over the country, and they started putting all these different musicians with them. They pluck a couple musicians from Ike Turner's band, one named Johnny O'Neill and Jackie Brenton. Jackie Brenton was in my father's band for, Rocket 88,
Wow.
And so if you look back and you look at the history, and there's enough written on this, you see.
I thought I knew this stuff and I had researched this stuff. There's nothing like oral history.
That's true. And it's funny because I laugh. I think of my father almost like this Forrest Gump, in the sense that all of these different connections through his life from, Harvey Fuqua, and who started in my father's band, and so many on and on and on, musicians. And just, he spent his life recording and took that 20 years off. And then when he steps back into the scene, because I really kind of sort of got it ignited again, I said, man, I just wanted to hear. I'm in California, and I secretly booked a tour, and people were excited that he was back to playing. He comes out and he does that, and he starts recording more and more. He starts going to Europe and doing different things, and he's back on the scene. And now he's enjoying it. His kids are grown. He doesn't have to worry about starving and whether or not he's going to get paid, because I'm sitting there saying, let me look that contract over for you, Dad, and that kind of thing. So it came full circle, and I always think about just how proud I was to be involved in music. In fact, I produced 3 of his records. One he did with Kenny Barron and Charles Fambro and some different musicians. I was able to produce those. And it really made me feel good to be involved in that, to that degree.
Well, as soon as we make it through the strikes successfully, we've got to. I want to be a part of getting that story to film.
That's nice. Thank you so much.
And listen, it's still evolving. Talk a little bit about how his experiences influenced your culinary style and all of those unique blends of flavors that we experience at Prime Smokehouse,
Yeah,
please.
so one of the things that happened when I was growing up, I didn't appreciate it to the degree I do now, honestly, that I was surrounded with these famous musicians in my house. My father, who was known all his life as this serious cook, and living out in the suburbs, the serious. So what he started doing was, he was from Texas, and barbecue is king in Texas. And what he started to do, he'd dig a big hole in the ground, he'd drop some hickory logs down, and he'd pull a grate over top. He'd throw briskets and slabs of briskets and ribs on this thing, and it'd be smoking all day. Musicians would come over, bring
Mm,
their axes, and it would be a jam session around barbecue and around good food, pies, and all this sort of thing.
mm.
And then you look over there, there's Mickey Roper, there's Shirley Scott, there's, all of these great folks in my house,
Lip smacking, lip
Bobby
smacking.
Durham, all of these great folks in my house, eating, lip smacking, dancing. My late brother he was a serious dancer. He'd be playing James Brown stuff. He'd be dancing around. I, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and all that stuff was going on. So when I talk about my childhood and how, in spite of all of these things and racism and things that we experienced, there was always this sense of joy and sense of community. As I reflect back on those things, those are the things that are predominant in my mind as I look back at my childhood, the good things to eat, the good music that played. So when you see the Prime Smokehouse, that's an extension of what existed when I was a kid. Now we have good food with good music wrapped around it. We have sense of community. Now people are coming around and they're saying, this is where we want to be on the weekend. This is where we want to go.
That place was crowded when I went, and you had so many people waiting to get in for music night.
Yeah.
I'm talking because I've been more than once and will
Thank you.
continue to go. Prime Smokehouse Barbecue and Beyond enjoys significant recognition. Let me say this though. I want to say it to your face because certainly it is the one place I've ever dined where the food outshines the music on guest artist nights. And just tell us about your decision that a restaurant along the Tar River in North Carolina could and would bring world class artists to the stage during summer
Let me
nights.
say this, and I'm going to throw my wife a little dap right here, right now, because one of the things that happened is, the Rocky Mountain Mills was just being developed, sort of, and that place that you see when you go into the Prime Smokehouse was a pile of rubble. It was just rubble. We're walking over boulders and stones and gravel, And my wife walks in there and she's looking the place over and she says, "You know what? This could be really nice. This could be beautiful." And she said, "We could put a bar over here. We could put the kitchen back along here. We could have seating along this river outside." And she took what was in her mind and built this beautiful place with the decor and everything that you see in there. And
Where years ago black people worked for
oh, there you
free.
go. There you go. I hear that quite often, from the griots that walk into my restaurant and say, "You know what this place used to be? It makes me feel good to see that an African American can have a place this beautiful with food this good."
And share what it used to be.
It was an
Share
old
what it used to
textile
be.
mill. Everybody knows that the South, especially this part of the South, was fueled by cotton and free labor and sharecropping and all of the degradations imposed upon black folks. And whenever black folks were involved in something, it was really because they were being exploited, not because anybody wanted them to be involved. So it's significant that these people who were developing the mill came to me and said, "How could we get you involved?" Because I had Prime Smokehouse was just a few steps away, really a mile and a half away in the heart of downtown, and they started putting this money into
Quite successful.
it
Quite
was, and
successful.
that's the point. They saw the success of it and said, "How do we get that in here?" And that's what
Mhm.
triggered everything. So it's one of those kind of things that you see a real transition, and it reminds you that when we seek to do things excellently, that people have to pay attention to what we do. You can't run from black excellence. We see that in every aspect of life right now. We see that when African Americans excel, so whether they're trying to exploit it or whether or not they're just really appreciated, it equals the same thing at the end, which is We have to include you. And I told, when we were in the heart of downtown, one of the things was people told us repeatedly, ain't nobody coming across them tracks to come in your restaurant. And I said at the time, and I
Mm-hmm.
told the newspaper when we were talking about this, I said, look, everybody's coming. One thing you know for sure
Mm-hmm.
is that white folks anywhere are not going to let you have anything nice that they don't partake in. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants a clean place. Everybody wants something that's beautiful, something that tastes. Everybody wants the same thing. And the more we look at each other, the more we realize how much alike we are. And I think that's important to understand that there's so much that we have in common that we spend so much time focusing on the things that we don't have in common, which just seems silly.
And there were many directions you could go in naming the restaurant.
Oh,
Share the inspiration
I'm
behind
glad you
its
asked me
name.
that because I forgot about that until you just now asking me this. The catering business when I was a kid was called Prime. My father named it Prime Lunch Service. That was the name of our business, our lunch service. And I thought about it. I said, when I decided I wanted to open a restaurant, I said, I'm going to name it the Smokehouse. Father said, why don't you name it the Prime Smokehouse? you know, and that's where that name came from. At first I was like, I don't know. I slept on. I said, that's a good idea, the Prime Smokehouse. And I find people trying to steal my name too. By the way, yeah, we got a phone call one day from a uniform manufacturer. It says, when are you guys going to pay for your uniform? What are you talking about? We don't have any uniforms we haven't paid for. They said, we ship your uniforms to Florida and you haven't paid. So why would you ship uniforms to me in Florida? Wait, aren't you a guy from the Prime Smokehouse? There's a Prime Smokehouse in Florida, Tampa, Florida. I go online. Somebody has literally stolen the Prime Smokehouse. This was years ago. And they
Uh-huh.
stole my mission statement. They stole the backstory of my father digging a hole and barbecue. I mean, the whole thing. And they set it up
Wow.
there and they went out of business after about 7 to 8 months. Every review was like, this place sucks. I mean, it was, but it was one of those things that's where the name came from anyway. I'm chasing rabbits, but the point of the matter is it came from my father, who had this idea that why don't you go back and say what we did back in the day? And I'm glad I named it that.
I'm so glad you named it that as well. It just feels
Oh,
right.
thanks.
It comes off the mouth
Mhm.
right. And when you go in there, it
Oh,
delivers to
thank
the
you.
name. The food
Yeah.
really delivers to the name. Um, Talk a little bit about the emotions and motivations that led you and Yalem to open your first restaurant in Baltimore.
Like I said, we came here. We were living in DC for some years. My wife was a nurse, and she worked at Johns Hopkins and Duke and so forth over the years. But when we were in DC, when we got to North Carolina, we Sunday mornings we really used to go to brunches in DC and going to different things. We couldn't find anywhere to eat. And we said, and that's what really started this whole thing. We couldn't find the places to eat like we wanted to go and eat. We didn't
Mhm.
really do like buffets and things like that. We were looking for nice, quaint little brunches and things, and they didn't exist.
Like me here in California, General Ed, I started my company because I couldn't find one that treated me the way I wanted to be treated,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
as a worker. Yeah, yeah. So you guys,
It's
you
almost like
guys were
a
inspired by
necessity
what you
almost. Yeah.
didn't.
And once we opened, and I didn't have anything that equaled Carolina vinegar pork. I didn't know what it was. My father was a Texan, so we had ribs and brisket. And we had about 5 items on the menu, but it really started. And we were in the Raleigh area, Garner and Raleigh, and it really started to catch on. So even though it wasn't what it is now as far as how burgeoning it
Mhm.
is with population, it was always trending up. And more people would spread. The word of mouth became very strong. And people said, man, they got some good food over there. And so I added more and more things to the menu, and then we started focusing. We got to add a lot of spread of gluten-free options for people, more beautiful salads, fresh seafood. We start, lobster tail. I'm going to make sure we have filet on there. People want to have a filet mignon sometime. So we started really expanding the menu. And it was one of those things that it just grew. It just kept growing.
Well, the culinary scene in North Carolina is vibrant, and it wasn't in the area that you chose to go into. You brought a lot of restaurants and restaurateurs to the area as well who see the potential because of what you pioneered. Now, particularly when it comes to barbecue, as you just talked about. The Prime Smokehouse has been named the top dining destination for travelers to North
I know
Carolina.
that's what
That's
applies
an
to us because
impressive
it's
achievement.
surprising because you got to remember North Carolina. There's Asheville, there's Charlotte, there's the capital city of Raleigh, there's Durham, there's all these different places, and this thing that pops up and it says that and the governor commented on it, and all of this added momentum to what it is that we do, and it's just we have just a very simple formula, which is put love on what you're doing. I don't like to see food just mass produced to the point where there's no detail to anything.
Mm,
When we
mm,
make our
mm.
collard greens, for example, we smoke turkey wings in our smoker. We use those smoked turkey wings to make. In the morning, here comes a truck from Canita Farms bringing fresh produce, collard greens, cabbage that we use for coleslaw. I'm to the point where I remember my father used to say, the only way to get good coleslaw is to take a head of cabbage and a knife and cut that cabbage up and mix it. That's the way we do it even in the restaurant now. We sell a lot of coleslaw. We take a
Mm.
head of cabbage and a knife, chop it, we mix it, and that's how we make our coleslaw. Collard greens, you'll never go in my kitchen when somebody's not in there cleaning collard greens, taking the stalks, scrubbing
That
collard
is
greens.
wonderful.
Yams come from the
That
farm.
is
We do
wonderful.
orange ginger yams. I said that, and my wife was really a stickler for really things that are healthier too. So my yams don't have butter. I use reduced oranges. We use fresh ginger in there. Gives it a unique taste, and people love it. I said,
And the yams are real.
real, real. No cans. I'm not going to dump collards and yams out of a can. We're going to peel those. There's a lot of work that
Right.
goes into producing the food that we're producing there. All the steaks are hand cut, certified Angus beef, really beautiful steaks. You're not going to find that steak in a lot of places. Scallops are always fresh. They're coming from New Bedford. They're fresh. We pan sear them. The salmon I fillet back there. I skin it back there, and it's always beautiful, fresh.
Oh, my daughter
You know,
loves your
thank you.
salmon. She
So a lot of
loves your
salmon.
salmon.
So.
Well, my family loves your
Uh,
everything on your table. Let me tell you, you have totally interrupted Sunday dinner cooking it ourselves
oh, that's
anymore.
nice.
But thankfully, we get it the way we remember it and even better,
Oh, that's
even
nice.
better. So
Thank
thank you. General Ed, the connection between your father's culinary chops and your own is dynamic. Prime Smokehouse has a gorgeous bar too, though. And although I don't drink alcohol, my siblings have assured
you.
me each time we've been there that the drinks are masterpieces. Are the cocktails unique creations
You know
there?
what? I'll tell you something funny. My wife doesn't drink anything. Me, I like to have a little sip of something every once in a while, especially when I'm on a vacation, you know. But
Uh huh.
she's the one who really pushed this whole, we want beautiful drinks. We want to make sure you guys, they're consistent.
From a beautiful
And she picked
bar.
every stone on that bar, every light that hangs from it, all of that sort of thing.
Wow.
So it was really a part of, and so the bar we take a lot of pride in. The wines are curated. We make sure. Of course, what happens in a little town like this is when we have a really popular wine, then it pops up at one of the local stores, Harris Teeter or Sam's Club, and that's when we change them again.
Right.
We want to make sure
Yeah,
that the wines
yeah.
you find in our restaurant.
Yeah, I was going to say, my brother told me, he said, you know what? The minute he brings something in here, it shoots across the region.
Oh, that's the yeah. But we try to. That's how we keep things fresh and interesting. Is that we don't want you to be able to go just anywhere and get what you get in my restaurant. I'm really clear about that. And I know there's
And here's the
Mhm.
thing. He, here's the thing. When we read your menu, like I called my son and I was reading the menu to him. By the way, he came in when he hit Carolina
Mhm.
as well. But I was calling him, before he got there and he was like, his idea was like, oh my God, are you at a soul food restaurant? Is it going to be, greasy and blah, blah, blah? Because some people maybe don't even have a relationship to what that food is, push it out there. When he came and he saw the elegance and the beauty and the roundedness of the menu, and we were able to walk outside and feel a sense of the history of the place, he's not someone who shows emotion publicly in a
Mhm.
very physical way, and he gave me the hardest hug and said, thank you for bringing me here. I mean,
And
it's
that's what we want people to feel. We want them to understand. Food doesn't have to be greasy because it's soul food. It doesn't. You don't have to feel it clogging your arteries in the moment you eating it. Sometimes things can be done tastefully and healthfully at the same time, and that's what we really try to focus on. And too many of our communities, anyway, this are food deserts. And people get excited every time they hear that some greasy spoon is coming, and some fast food greasy place. We have to start changing that mindset. I would love to see more and more of restaurants that cater to our people in particular just start thinking about it more healthily. And I am seeing more of that happening, I believe, where people are focusing more on how healthy things are. And, there's going to be decadence. You eat a bowl of my peach cobbler and put that vanilla ice cream on top. There's some decadence there. But,
It's so funny. It's so funny because my sister invited one of her most influential teachers from high school to lunch
Mhm.
with us at the Prime Smokehouse. And she came in and we were looking at the menu, we deciding what we want. And she didn't look at hers and she asked her why not. And she said, because I'm going to have the peach cobbler. And we said, yeah, but dessert, she said, nope. I'm going to eat that, then I'll see how I feel. And I laugh because often I've said, eat dessert first. Life is
I get a
short.
lot of
Eat
people do
dessert first,
that.
right? But she literally did it. And by the way, she did end up ordering afterwards as well, but she went for that peach cobbler
That's
first.
good. That's good.
But listen, your journey has taken you from journalism to restaurant ownership, and you've excelled in both areas. What advice do you offer for our family listening right now who may be considering a career pivot and pursuing their passions differently?
You know, One of the things I don't think we focus enough on is the whole idea of business plan. The whole idea of a business plan. And really, I think that a lot of times we go into things just based on feelings. That's a good start. I think that's a beautiful start because if you're not passionate about something, it's never going to really work. I get people all the time think,
Hmm.
I'm going to get in the restaurant business because I want to make a lot of money. The first reason you have to enjoy cooking. You have to enjoy interaction with people. And once you get to the point where you say, this is what I want to do, now you have to sit down and you have to do a business plan. It has to be well thought out. Bounce it off people. Seek criticism. I think that a lot of times when we're doing business, we don't seek criticism. We seek people just to co-sign. And if your business plan tells you that you're not going to make any money for 6 years, you're going to actually lose money for 6 years, that's not necessarily bad as long as you're trending the right way. But what you have to do is you have to believe that business plan. And sometimes that business plan is telling you, don't do this. Don't do it. Because everybody
Right.
everybody can't decide that they're not going to have a vacation for 6, 7 years, that they're not going to pay themselves for several years. They're going to make sure that the lights stay on. And that's going to be the sole part of the journey for a long time. So I think that perseverance, whatever the money you believe you need, multiply it times five. Save,
Mm,
get ready to do
mm,
this. And I look at someone like my wife and I who we had decent credit going into the restaurant business. And bank said, I'm not loaning you anything. I'm not going to give you anything.
mhm,
I
mhm,
don't trust the restaurant. I get it now. I understand. A lot of times we will write that off as strict racism. And sometimes it's just,
mhm,
they know the numbers better than we do. But I
mhm,
was able to take and had people in my life who said, I don't believe in a restaurant, but you know what, Ed? I kind of believe in you. And part of that was making a real sacrifice and taking money out of the house. I don't recommend anybody do this, but this was a journey I took where I took equity out of the house. My wife and I said, we believe in this thing enough. And between when I talk about loans from friends, here's 5,000, here's a couple thousand over here, da 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 da. I knew that I wasn't going to ever get out of this restaurant business till I paid those friends back. They
right,
trusted me.
right.
I don't know that I could have had that same sort of drive had it been a bank. I don't know, but I couldn't sleep at night knowing that I owe this person over here, I owe this person. So I'm going to stay in this thing at least until we pay those people back. And then we picked up a stride and things started to improve and things started better. So I would tell people, please follow that dream, but follow it with real good research, real hard work. And, to talk about faith, but without work, we know it's dead. That's the real.
Right,
That's the real
right,
proof that you
right.
believe in something. Because people say, "Oh, I believe I can," but once you stop working, you didn't really believe in it. And we were clawing and working
Mm,
nonstop, and now we've been doing this for 15 years. But I'll tell you, what's happening now with the restaurant wasn't anything like what was happening when we started in those first few years of the restaurant. But I'm glad we stuck with it because we could see the success of what hard work means. You know?
My family and I are so glad you stuck with it as well, not only because of how much we enjoy the food, but how much we enjoy the reputation you're building for the region. And it's a shared reputation. When we go into your restaurant, we see people of all strata there, whether it is economic, political, faith. We see people just coming together around tables of great food. And I can't think of a better American story than that. And perhaps I should ask this question of your beautiful wife, but since you're here, please answer on her
Mhm.
behalf. From the experiences you guys have had, how do you see food and culinary traditions being a bridge to understanding and unity amongst the different cultures and
That's a beautiful
communities?
question, and you ask a question that a magazine, Our State magazine, sought out. They came to our restaurant some years
Ooh,
ago and did a feature on our restaurant, and they called it Harmony, Study in Harmony, or something along that line. Because what they recognized was that despite the history and despite there was a lot of tension going on in the city at the time, when they walked into the restaurant, they saw everybody in there. And to me, it's a lesson, and I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, of how everybody wants the same thing. When it comes to everybody wants a clean place, fresh food, and when people are next to each other, the more that we're in close proximity to one another, the more we realize how alike we are, and that we all have some of the same stuff inside. We want the same things. We want safety. We want beauty. We want, all of these things that we want. And the more we're together, the more we recognize. I think places like this are important. That we didn't build a restaurant and say, man, we're going to get black folks. We built a restaurant and said, we want everybody to come in here and realize where they are when they get in here. Since we started the restaurant, I
well,
can't
you
I can't remember having to take and I don't have drunks. People, yeah, it's just people coming here looking for a good time, looking for a place. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I can please everybody who walks in that door because I can't please everybody all the time. But that's the aim, and I find that people are really appreciating it. And that's why the social media outlet, the vehicles.
and your service staff, right now, regardless of where you go, people are struggling to find people to be service staff, right? Your service staff is professional, engaged, warm, caring. They don't just hand you your food and come back
And
2 minutes
you let them,
later and
and
ask you how
and
is
thanks for letting them know with the way you tip too. By the way, I see them smiling extra big when people like you come. But
um,
they are very. I'm very thankful for the staff that I have. My wife keeps constant training going on. She brings in consultants to have them come in early morning. You guys here, she's going to talk to you about service. She brings different people in along that line because it's really important. And when staff make a good income too in a clean place, they feel good about it. They feel good about themselves. And she's always pushing this idea that this is a profession and you make good money doing this. And there's
yeah,
certain standards that we
yeah.
have. And now some of the people who are there a little bit longer, when new people come in, they're the ones who are pressing them to do the right thing, to make sure that they've cleaned properly.
And you talk about it being a profession, General Ed. One of the things that blew my mind, amongst many things that blew my mind the first time I went to Paris, was just how much of a profession good
That's right.
service is. People, I mean, instead of the servers fighting for the customers are fighting for which server they like
Uh-huh.
and will adjust their dining time to the server. That's how important
That's right.
and how impeccable the attention to caring for how a person's food experience is. And that's what I feel. I hadn't thought about it until this
Mm-hmm.
moment, but that's what I feel when I go into um, Prime Smokehouse. I feel that. And so maybe I have to bring Yalem on
Yeah.
and we
Well,
have our own
she has
conversation.
a book that's coming out. It's beautiful. It is a beautiful book where she talks about her early life in Ethiopia and in different parts of the world. She lived from Sri Lanka and different places. And
Mhm.
services really emphasized and how she grew up and learning to serve the elders and all this sort of thing. And after each chapter where she talks about, for example, she went to the honey market or she went to, the coffee market, so forth, then she puts a series of recipes about honey. And then she has, coffee series of recipes about coffee, but all of the recipes sort of back up stories about service and growing up in Ethiopia and hard times and good times.
Let's get her onto the
Yeah,
pod when she's ready to launch
absolutely.
her book and
I'll,
talk
I'll make sure
about
she
it.
gets a
Let's get
copy.
her on.
Absolutely.
That'll be wonderful. Food is a top priority for all of us. Unfortunately, many, as we talked about, we leaned in a little bit on it, are living in food
Yeah.
deserts, or going through food
Hmm.
struggles. Don't you and Yalem feel great about the way you're influencing and caring for people? I mean, we talk about the clientele coming into the restaurant, but you're really impacting that community, and your thought and your care is there. I remember when last I was there, you invited me for a Sunday brunch, where you honor the people who come in and the artists who perform in your summer series. You just don't stop caring for people, and food is a part of all
That's
of
right.
it,
And,
isn't it?
everything flashes back to my childhood, as I told you before. But one of the things, whenever we bring musicians to perform in a restaurant, I don't care where in the country they're from, Louisiana or from, New York or wherever, California, we always ended, they play a Friday and a Saturday, and I end it with a big brunch at my house on Sunday because I want them to leave this place knowing how much they were appreciated. And I used to do this when I lived in DC, and my father would come and he'd play DC. Before he left, I'd have a big brunch, and I always invite maybe 15 or 20 of the people who are jazz lovers who appreciate the music so they can interact with them around a good meal and that sort of thing. And that's why I always do that. I always end it in a brunch. And
And you ended in a brunch at your
yes,
home, and an invitation to someone's home is an invitation to
right.
their heart, and it touched me
No,
deeply. Although I couldn't attend, it really touched me deeply, and I pray that I get another
we'll make it
invitation
happen.
when I'm able to
Yeah.
come. Looking ahead, what do you and Yellum see as the next exciting chapter for Prime Smokehouse?
We, I don't know how much longer we'll do this. I keep thinking that we'll do it forever, but I know that's not a reality. We enjoy it. One of the things that we really are trying to do is there's some staff there that we're really grooming to be able to do this thing when we're not around. And I could see, we don't have kids, but we have staff that we think about as our children. And we've also got a line of products that we've done, like barbecue sauces, rubs, and different things that we really try to get into, many things like that people can always have access to what it is that we're trying to do. But we want this thing to be in perpetuity, even if we're not a part of it down the line 10, 20 years from now, who knows. But we'd like it to be
You're
carried on, from some of the staff who are enjoying it, loving it, making a living, feeding their families, and doing all these sorts of things, buying homes. It makes us feel good when we see people who work for us who came in and they didn't know where they were going to stay, literally, and now they bought homes, and they've
Yeah.
bought nice cars that they can drive, and they really show their appreciation toward the business. That makes us feel good, and we want to see that thing continue even past this.
And it's so good for the region and so good for the economy. It's great for the country. One of the things, if I had any influence to you at all, would be to tickle both of your thoughts on perhaps using some of that other space there as a chef school. And though they could provide the food to some of the areas around there that aren't quite equipped. And I could see that that could be a beautiful funded opportunity to just create. I mean, with the
When
South,
you
who
speak, I
doesn't know
listen,
about
right?
Southern?
You're the business guru. When you speak, in my ears look. Whoop.
Well, because you got the space there, you've got such excellent staff there, and you guys are there. You're not sitting at home with a restaurant that just has your brand on it. You're there, and you got the space there. I just could see, and you're so well located to areas in North Carolina and along the seaboard, the coast, that you could build a school for chefs there, and it would be, I think, an outstanding thing, and I think it would be profitable within the
Oh,
first year.
thank you.
Again, providing food
That's right.
to local places that don't have the opportunity to get that caliber of food, whether it's to, well, I should be quiet because I may be stepping in other people's spaces now. We'll talk when you
And you know
invite me to
what?
brunch. How
That,
about
oh,
that?
that sounds good. Next time you're in town, one thing
Mhm.
we were able to do, like during the pandemic, it was a tough time for a lot of people. And a brother here who runs the Boys and Girls Clubs, his name's Ron Green. He collaborated with Prime Smokehouse to provide 250 meals a night to indigent folks, and he got a grant
Mhm.
to do that. And we worked with them,
Mhm.
and what we focused on in those meals, those 250 meals a night, which they delivered. The Boys and Girls Club personnel picked that food up, delivered it to these homes. We focused on healthy meals, no fried, no greasy, just beautiful salads and potatoes and all kinds of things like that. So, you're on to something, which could be expanded to a whole different
Yeah,
level.
and partner, and you can have partnership to that chef school, because you could partner with Amazon on certain. You know what? We don't have to do that right here. We'll
There
do it
you
over
go. I like the
brunch.
way you're
Okay.
thinking.
Okay. Right now, let's go four for four.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you four
Uh-oh.
questions to which you'll give me four
Okay.
answers. All answers are correct since they're your
Okay.
answers. And the first question is, you ha 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 get to invite four people from any time in history to
Ooh.
present to dinner. Who's at your table and why?
Frederick Douglass is there.
Why?
Frederick Douglass, because anybody who could, in a time when you could get your arm cut off for reading a book, could figure out how, with a couple crumbs of bread or a little piece of cake, that he could get these folks to teach him how to read, take that with no formal education to speak of, and become this great orator, this magnificent writer, this person that we're going to talk about forever. He did that with very little. And so to me,
And one of the baddest
that is,
hairstyles in history.
and so Frederick Douglass is one of my heroes. I put that there and say, yes,
Yes.
he's at dinner. And
Okay.
who deserves to be at that table too, because she needs to sit across from him. I got to have Marion Wright Element, my good friend. She'd have to be at that table, and I love her. And she would have the questions that we forget to ask. She'd be popping them to Frederick Douglass and making it a better, even greater experience. Another person I'd like to see at that table would be so many folks.
Mhm.
Who would I want there? I'd like to see. Oh my God. I'd like to see. I'd like to see Duke Ellington sitting at that table too.
Oh,
Duke Ellington, you have to be there. I think that there's
that would be a great after
man.
dinner.
I do. Yes. I got one more person. When we get off this call, I'm going to have a million people. Think of so and so. He would be my musician person. And then I think I need. I think there was a guy named Mr. Hemings, okay, and he worked for Thomas Jefferson, and he was really, when you start thinking about modern chefs, Hemings, you know,
Sally's brother or her.
yes, it was her brother. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh,
I believe it was her
uh-huh.
brother, but I would like, because he transformed the way people think about chefing, and he looked like me. He looked like you, and I'd want him there. I want to hear the ideas that came out of his mind. To me, that would anyway. Yeah, I'd like to.
That's a good table. That's a really good table. And being that it's your table, I know it's going to be a wealth.
Oh, we're gonna have the pots on now. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Um, so listen, I don't know how you beat yourself, but let's go two for
Okay.
four. What four artists or pieces of music are you listening to right now, and why?
I and wow, that's a good question too. There is someone whose music is very simple and very soulful that I love and I go back to. I love Layla Hathaway's music.
Layla's come up several
I love
times
Layla
in our
Hathaway's music. It's very simple. It's not,
Donny
yeah,
Hathaway's daughter.
yes. And
Hmm.
I love her. I love Sarah Vaughan.
Oh, my
I
daughter loves
love
Sarah Vaughan and has since she was young.
Sarah Vaughan.
Since she was in her teens, she's loved Sarah Vaughan's
I love
music.
Sarah Vaughan. I love,
Hmm.
and it's funny. I put my wife has got me really in love with Mozart's work. I mean, just he was like a jazz musician for his day. He was creative, was soulful.
Yeah, see, you guys are deep into that music. I'm simple and don't know it well. I'm a Chopin girl, but I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. Why Sarah Vaughan? You didn't tell me
Because
why.
can I give you a little mini quick story? She was playing at Blues
Please.
Alley. Okay, I loved her forever. First of all, her voice is like a breeze. It's effortless. She's breathing, and music's coming out of her. And so she was playing at Blues Alley. This was just maybe the year before she died. And I said, I'm going to go see Sarah Vaughan. A friend of mine visited me in town. I called her. I said, hey, I got tickets to go see Sarah Vaughan. And she said, I don't know if I want to see Sarah Vaughan. I want to see something. I said, tell you what, I can take these tickets. I'll go by myself. And she said, okay, I'll go. So we go and we get the seat to sitting in Blues Alley, right in the front seat. And Sarah Vaughan is singing. And I look around the room. There's no African Americans in there. I'm in there. The friend of mine is with me, Debbie Vance, and we're sitting there. Sarah Vaughan is singing, and she's beautiful, and she's doing these little ditties and things that, if you follow the music, you understand. She's cracking little jokes and things in her music, and I'm giving amen. Oh yes, I hear it. I know the ditties. I understand the language, and
Like you're in
that's
black
exactly
church.
what it was. And so here comes a waitress, comes over to me, and she says, "If you don't keep quiet, we're gonna have to ask you to leave." Right? Sarah Vaughan leans down. She takes both of my hands in her hands and she sings. She's holding my hands and she's singing. And I'm looking around. I'm hoping this waitress is seeing what's going on here. But that happened. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying that, and what I expected, the point I was going to make is what I expected was that Sarah Vaughan wouldn't be the Sarah Vaughan that I grew up with, but I wanted to see her before she passed. What blew me away is that her voice was as powerful and as beautiful as it was when I was a kid. She still sounded that good. I
Mhm.
remember she had her hand, I think she had her hand wrapped. She had cancer or something, but I couldn't believe that this music was coming. She was dropping from a low bass thing here to this beautiful whisk
Mhm.
of it was just beautiful, soprano whisk. And I just sat there thinking, this is magnificent. So she's always been my favorite singer. And my mother sort of stylized herself after Sarah Vaughan too in the way she sang.
So you've got Layla, you've got the Queen Sarah, and you've got Mozart. Who's your
My
fourth?
fourth is my fourth is the great pianist by the name of Barry Harris.
Mm.
I love Barry
Mm.
Harris just because
Mm. Why?
I like this simplicity of his music, swinging, soulful, not complicated. And he was striving to be somebody like a Bud Powell, but I like the way he took that music and he became this great teacher. And he traveled to Europe and he had tons of people who just wanted to be at his shoulder as he's teaching this music. And so I think that what he did with it was he tried, in the same sense, Wynton Marsalis is sort of a younger version of that whole thing. And
Yeah,
what Wynton
yeah,
has done
yeah.
with music is, to me, is a beautiful thing too. But Barry Harris was that
Mhm.
guy who's making sure that this music survived past himself. And he died last year. But he made sure that he connected so many people to that music that I thought that he's one of my favorites.
Wow, yeah. And the night that I made, you had a series of artists. The night I made it for Joe Locke, uh, the artists on that stage, I believe, had come together for
Yeah.
the first
Hmm.
time to play at your
Yeah,
restaurant,
but they
right?
understood
They
the language
wanted
of it,
to
so they
be
could get
there.
together and they can have that conversation. They understood, just what the music's about and so forth. I start thinking of all of the Aretha Franklins and all these so many folks I love, but I think those,
Yeah,
of course,
yeah,
say
yeah.
something very special.
Those are beautiful. Those are beautiful. What four books do you recommend and why?
Okay, that's a good one. Uh, this is it's not fresh anymore, but there's a book by um, Charles Johnson. He was like the first black person to win an American book award. The name of the book was Middle Passage, and it's
Hmm.
it's not fiction, it's not fact. I call it faction, right? Because of the
Hmm.
research he had to put in this book, where he talks about the journey that slaves made from Africa to the United States. And if you could imagine this, it's hard to imagine that someone could write a book like this and there could be so much humor in this book. And I recommend anybody go back and read that book. You will laugh, you will love it, and you will feel it in ways that, Charles Johnson wrote that book. It's called Middle Passage. There's another book, I wish I could remember the author, but it's called Bullwhip Days. And it's just a compilation of slave narratives. And there's no commentary in it. It's just linking together these slave narratives and the story that tells about African American perseverance, African American intelligence, and tolerance that those generations of people before us exercised so that we could be here now as black business people, as just people on this planet, what they endured. That book to me is powerful, and it was given to me as a gift many years ago. And I've read it through many, many times. And each time I read
Mm,
that book,
mm.
it has something new in it for me. And it's in the slave narrative, so it's in the language of, if and they, that black language, but it is so powerful
Mhm,
and
mhm.
so beautiful and so
I call it early American English.
that it is, It's just
Yeah.
so that's a good book. I love a book that was done. Ralph Ellison. We know what a great writer he was, and an
Yeah.
Invisible Man, and I just think that was a beautiful book.
Mhm.
I think the autobiography of Malcolm X is another a great book. There's so many. There's so many.
Yes.
That these are books that speak to me and drive me. I can always go
Mhm.
back and reflect on things that motivated me in a very special way from those.
They sound each to have ideological and
That's right.
practical aspects
That's
as
true.
well. Lifting,
That's right.
teaching. Well, we're going 4 for 4.
Okay.
4 pieces of advice that you offer the family listening now. And if that advice was given to you by someone, please pay homage and mention who you got it from.
Okay. Bits of advice. We always talk about, and I, this is real. It's understanding that the most difficult thing you can do. I don't know who's going to disagree with this or not, but this is my vibe.
What,
I don't know if
what?
somebody's going to disagree with this or not, but I believe that the most difficult thing we can do, especially as African Americans, but it probably holds true across the board, is to see something, to see it. Like actualizing something is easier than imagining it. And what I mean by that is I saw Prime Smokehouse before it's what it is. And let me put an analogy like this. People were on this planet for tens of thousands of years, and they looked at the moon every day. And once they thought, I want to walk on the moon, it only took a few seconds for them to walk on the moon. Do you know what I mean? And so the difficulty wasn't in actually figuring out how you get there. The difficulty was imagining in the first place that you could do it. Right. And so I think about that in a lot of business things and a lot of things we do, in business and in accomplishing anything. Once you start putting the work toward it, that's the easier part than you seeing yourself actually being able to possess this thing. That's one bit of advice I would do.
Powerful.
Just believe it. Once you see it, it can happen. The hard part was seeing it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then you can figure out how you get to that thing. And a lot of times, especially as Black folks, we're sort of put in a box about what we dream, about what we see. We don't even know how to dream. I had a guy working for me in my kitchen who's working one day. He's prepping, he's cutting something up, and he's saying, one day I'm gonna get me a moped. I said, dude, if you dreaming, why aren't you getting you a big SUV, or why are you dreaming about a moped? You're in the middle of the desert, dying of hunger and thirst. Man, one day I'm gonna get me a communion wafer I could put. I'm gonna dream about a turkey and something good to drink. Dream bigger, and then it's easier to actualize something, but you got to get it in here first. You got to see it first. That's what I think. That's one bit of advice. Another is this whole idea of you will never get anything if you don't give something. And so, the more you give, you find that when you give to the universe gives back to you. That's a fact. Sometimes you're thinking, and you may look back, you'll forget things that you gave to folks and things that you did. And it'll come back to you, and you may not even realize, because at the time you were doing it, you weren't saying, if I give this, I'm going to get something back. You're just doing it because it feels good to do it. And it comes back to you, and you may not realize it for a long time later that, wow, I'm glad I did, because look how it came back. And that's like with service as well as goods. The more you give, the more you get. That is as real as anything I can imagine. Another bit of advice would be to I would say don't let anybody's negative expectations of what you can and cannot do influence who you are and what you're capable of doing. Because there's always going to be haters, always. That shouldn't have anything to do with whether or not you're going to persevere in something, whether or not you're going to take and say, I want to do this. Now that's different than someone giving you some honest feedback of what might not be a good idea and you bouncing that off and trying to really hear it. That's different. But, when you're into something and you're saying, okay, you've put a plan together and you've seen the success on the other side. Remember I said, the hardest thing is to see it. You've seen it, so now you know how to get there. Go ahead and keep grinding and keep grinding. It may take you a long time to get there, but when you see you're not going backwards, you're going forward, keep chopping, keep grinding. Those would be my bits of advice.
Incredible. Incredible. You got to see it. Oh, wow. Yeah.
And one, this I should throw in the mix too, is that you don't have to limit your standards based on somebody else's standard of what something should be. If you see your standard way up here, keep trying to get to that thing. I look at Prime Smokehouse and I'm proud of what it is, and I think but I don't think I've really reached where it is I want to get yet. Because I told you, I said, well, I can't please everybody all the time, but that's still the goal. Is to strive. What I'm striving for is to get to the point where nobody's going to have a complaint We know that may be a lifelong. It's like the struggle to be a good Christian, where you're the perfect person. We know perfection may not be, you know, necessarily attainable. Doesn't mean we can't constantly be reaching for it, and that's what I think. You know,
Right, right. The reaching is the
yeah.
thing of perfection. Right, right. Oh my goodness. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been so wonderful, almost as wonderful as being in that
Oh, well,
restaurant eating. What's on the menu today? What's on the menu
oh man,
today?
you should see those beautiful that the beautiful fish that came in today. I'm excited about. Got some beautiful trout that we've filleted up, and you know,
Oh,
crab. You know, did you try crab cakes in my recipe by any chance?
you remember I told you I can't do the
Oh,
shellfish. My sister had the
uh,
crab cakes and Christy had the
well,
crab
I'll just
cakes.
tell you that
So
somebody just
they were
the crab cakes are
they were
really. I was born in
religiously
Baltimore. I was
enjoyed.
raised in Philly, but I was born in Baltimore, so having good crab cakes looks like in my pedigree, you know. And these,
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I can hardly wait to get back there. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much from my heart to your home. Thank you. Or should I say, from my heart to Prime
Thank you
Smokehouse.
so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. It's an honor to have someone like you bring me into your space and on your platform. Thank you so much. It's really appreciative. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And please hug your beautiful wife for
Going to do
me.
that all the time. Thank you. God bless you.
All
Love
righty.
you. All right.